If you're going to keep staring at him like that, at least try to be less obvious about it. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the sound of Mrs. Chen's voice right behind me. Spinning around, I found our school librarian giving me her signature knowing smile. The one that always made me feel like she could read minds. I wasn't staring, I protested weakly, though we both knew that was a lie. I'd been watching Ethan Matthews for the past 15 minutes as he pretended to study calculus at his usual table by the window. The same table where he'd been sitting every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past month. Of course not, Mrs. Chen said, adjusting her glasses with amusement. Just like you haven't volunteered for every single afternoon shift that coincides with his study sessions. I felt my cheeks burn. Was I really that transparent? I just I want to help students who need it. That's what library assistants are for. Right? Mrs. Chen's smile softened. Olivia Bennett, in the 3 years I've known you, you've always been terrible at lying. She placed a stack of books in my arms. But since you're here, you might as well make yourself useful. These need to go back on the shelves in the mathematics section. I groaned internally. The mathematics section was right next to Ethan's table. And Olivia, Mrs. Chen called after me as I started to walk away. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to actually talk to them. Easy for her to say she hadn't seen Ethan up close. With his perpetually tousled dark hair, those intense green eyes always focused on his textbooks, and the way his forehead creased when he was struggling with a particularly difficult problem. How was anyone supposed to just walk up and talk to him? I've been watching him struggle with calculus for weeks now. He'd come in, spread his books across the table, stare at the same page for hours, occasionally running his hands through his hair in frustration. Sometimes he'd pull out his phone, type something, then shake his head and go back to staring at his textbook. It was painful to watch, especially since I'd aced AP Calculus last year. The thing was, Ethan Matthews wasn't just any struggling student. He was *the Ethan Matthews, senior class president, captain of the debate team, and according to every teacher in Riverside High, one of the most brilliant students they ever taught, which made his apparent struggle with calculus all the more puzzling. I shelved the books methodically, stealing glances at him between each placement. Today he seemed particularly frustrated, his pencil tapping against the table in an irregular rhythm that was starting to drive me crazy. The afternoon sun streaming through the window caught the angles of his face just right, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, and a book slipped from my hands and landed with a loud thud on the floor. Ethan's head snapped up, and suddenly those green eyes were looking right at me. I froze, one hand still reaching for the fallen book, the other clutching the shelf like it was a lifeline. "Are you okay?" His voice was deep and concerned, carrying easily across the quiet library space. "I'm fine," I squeaked, then immediately wanted to die of embarrassment. Who squeaks? Apparently, I do. He was getting up from his chair. Why was he getting up from his chair? This wasn't part of the plan. The plan was to admire from afar. Maybe work up the courage to offer help in another week or two, or possibly next year. "Let me help you with that." And suddenly he was there, right next to me, picking up the fallen book. His height surprised me. I knew he was tall, but up close he practically towered over me. He glanced at the book's cover before handing it back. "Advanced Calculus." Yeah. I took the book, trying to ignore the way our fingers brushed. "I help Mrs. Chen organize the mathematics section sometimes. You must know a lot about calculus." And was that hope in his face? Yes, actually, I do." The words came out before I could stop them. "I took AP Calc last year." His eyes lit up, and I swear my heart stopped for a second. "Really, that's amazing. I've been having some trouble with it. Actually, would you if you're not too busy would you mind taking a look at something I'm stuck on?" And that's how I found myself sitting across from Ethan Matthews at his usual table, trying to remember how to breathe while explaining the chain rule. His notebook was neat and organized, but his current problem set was a mess of half-finished calculations and frustrated eraser marks. See, when you're dealing with composite functions, I explained, leaning over to point at his work, you have to apply the derivative rule to each part separately, then multiply them together. He nodded, watching my hand as I wrote out the steps. That ... actually makes sense when you explain it. His smile was grateful and maybe a little sheepish. I've been staring at this for hours. Sometimes you just need a fresh perspective, I said, trying to sound professional and not at all like my heart was doing backflips. Would you ... double quotes? He hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. Would you be willing to help me study regularly? I could really use a tutor. And you explain things so clearly. Mrs. Chen chose that exact moment to walk past our table, and I could have sworn I saw her hide a smile behind the book she was carrying. Yes, I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. I'd like that. What I didn't know then was that this moment, this simple exchange over calculus problems in our school library, would lead to the most complicated equation of my life. One that no amount of mathematical expertise could have prepared me to solve. But that's getting ahead of the story. My name is Olivia Bennett, and this is how I learned that sometimes the hardest problems to solve aren't found in any textbook. They're found in the secrets we keep, the assumptions we make, and the unexpected variables that change everything we thought we knew about the equation of love. The thing about tutoring your crush is that it's both a dream come true and a special kind of torture. So the derivative of sine is cosine? Ethan asked, his face inches from mine as we hunched over his calculus homework. 2 weeks into our tutoring sessions, and I still hadn't built up an immunity to his proximity. Right, I managed, trying to focus on the numbers and not on how his cologne smelled like winter mornings and expensive promises. But don't forget the chain rule when my phone buzzed, interrupting what would have been a perfectly coherent explanation about trigonometric functions. The text from Mom made me frown. Asterisk working late again tonight. Big meeting with the new VP. Leftover lasagna in the fridge. Don't wait up, asterisk. Everything okay? Ethan asked, and I quickly locked my screen. Yeah. Just Mom being Mom. She's been pulling a lot of late nights since the company restructuring. I tried to keep my voice light, but some of the worrying must have shown through. That sounds rough. His eyes softened with what seemed like genuine concern. My dad's been pretty busy lately too. New job and all. I nodded sympathetically, though privately I wished my mom's job situation was more secure. Ever since Anderson and Miller Publishing had announced their management shake-up 3 months ago, she'd been working overtime trying to prove herself to the new leadership. Anyway, I said, tapping his textbook, back to derivatives. But Ethan seemed distracted now, fidgeting with his pencil in that way I'd learned meant he had something on his mind. Hey, Olivia, would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? You know, outside of the library. The pencil I was holding clattered to the table. Coffee, I repeated intelligently. Yeah. I mean ... He ran a hand through his hair, making it even more attractively disheveled. You've been really helping me out with calc. And I thought maybe we could, Mr. Matthews. Mrs. Chen's voice cut through our conversation like a well-timed plot device. There's someone here to see you. We both looked up to see a tall man in an expensive suit standing at the library entrance. Even from this distance, I could see the family resemblance. Same strong jaw. Same intense green eyes. This had to be Ethan's father. Dad. Ethan's voice held a note of surprise that seemed odd for such a routine pickup. What are you doing here? Mr. Matthews strode over to our table, his presence commanding attention in a way that made me instinctively sit up straighter. Emergency at the office. I need you to pick up Sophie from her dance class. His eyes flickered to me, then back to Ethan. Who's your friend? This is Olivia, Ethan said. And was it my imagination? Or did he sound nervous? She's been helping me with calculus. Olivia, Mr. Matthews repeated, something unreadable crossing his face. Olivia Bennett. A chill ran down my spine. Yes, sir. Have we met? He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. No, but I've heard good things about you. Top of your class, aren't you? Before I could ask how he knew that, Ethan was already packing up his books. I should go, he said, shooting me an apologetic look. Sophie gets cranky if she has to wait. About that coffee ... double quotes. Another time, his father cut in smoothly. You don't want to keep your sister waiting. I watched them leave, feeling like I'd missed something important. The way Mr. Matthews had known my name. The strange tension in Ethan's shoulders. The abrupt exit. None of it added up. Interesting man, isn't he? Mrs. Chen materialized beside me, making me jump for the 100th time. Sometimes I swore she moved like a ninja. You know him. I make it my business to know everyone who comes into my library. She began collecting abandoned books from nearby tables. Though I believe he's better known in the corporate world these days. Especially since his recent appointment. Yes. As the new vice president of operations at Anderson and Miller Publishing. The world tilted sideways. Anderson and Miller Publishing, where my mum worked. Where she was currently in a meeting with the new VP where her entire career hung in the balance. And I was tutoring his son. Oh my God. I whispered, memories flooding back, Ethan's sudden appearance in the library a month ago. His mysterious struggles with a subject that should have been easy for someone as smart as him. The way he always seemed to know when I would be working, indeed, Mrs. Chen said, adjusting her glasses. I find it fascinating how small the world can be sometimes. Small didn't begin to cover it. This wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. But then why hadn't Ethan said anything? Why pretend to need help with calculus? Why ask me out for coffee? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. Asterisk new VP seems nice. His son goes to your school. Ethan Matthews. Do you know him? Asterisk. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Outside, I could see Ethan and his father in the parking lot, engaged in what looked like an intense discussion. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, his nervous tell, and said something that made his father shake his head. For someone who loved math as much as I did, I should have seen the pattern sooner. All the variables had been right there in front of me. 1. Ethan Matthews, brilliant student, suddenly struggling with basic calculus. 2. His mysterious appearances coinciding perfectly with my library shifts. 3. His father's new position at my mother's company. 4. The careful way he'd avoided mentioning his dad's job. The equation was starting to solve itself. I didn't like the answer I was getting, because either I was paranoid and seeing connections where there were none, or I was part of a calculation I hadn't even known was being made. Mrs. Chen placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, Olivia, the most important lessons we learn in a library have nothing to do with books. I watched Ethan's car pull away. My half-graded calculus worksheet still sitting on the table between us, full of derivatives and chain rules and perfectly predictable patterns. If only matters of the heart could be solved so easily. I spent the entire weekend analyzing every interaction I'd had with Ethan, like a detective reviewing security footage for clues I might have missed. The way he'd lingered in the library even after finishing his work. How his questions sometimes seemed rehearsed. The careful way he'd dance around certain topics. That Monday morning brought an unexpected variable to the equation. Olivia, Emma Reyes, my best friend since 7th grade, practically tackled me at my locker. Why didn't you tell me you were dating Ethan Matthews? I'm what? I nearly dropped my physics textbook. It's all over Rachel Chen's Instagram story. You two looking cozy in the library. She thrust her phone in my face, showing a perfectly framed photo of Ethan and me bent over his calculus homework, looking for all the world like we were about to kiss. The caption read, "Asterisk looks like someone's helping our class president with more than just math asterisk." We're not. I'm just tutoring him, I protested. But Emma's raised eyebrow told me she wasn't buying it. Sure. And that's why he turns into a stuttering mess whenever anyone mentions your name in debate club. She crossed her arms. And why he specifically requested you as his tutor. That last bit made me freeze. What do you mean? Requested. Oh, Emma's expression shifted from teasing to concerned. I thought you knew. Last month, when he asked Mrs. Chen about tutoring, he specifically asked if you were available. Sarah from yearbook committee overheard the whole thing. The bell rang, but I barely heard it. My mind was racing through the implications. Ethan hadn't just happened to need help when I was working. He'd planned it. But why? Was it because of his father's new position? Was I some kind of corporate espionage project? Leaf, Emma waved her hand in front of my face. We're going to be late for AP Physics. Right, Physics. I slammed my locker shut with more force than necessary. Where we learn about actions and reactions. Cause and effect. How everything in the universe follows predictable patterns except for human hearts and corporate politics. Okay. Now you're just being dramatic. Maybe I was. But drama seemed like an appropriate response when your entire romantic narrative might be a calculated business strategy. I managed to avoid Ethan for most of the day, which wasn't hard considering we were in different grades. But our scheduled tutoring session loomed ahead like an approaching storm. When I walked into the library that afternoon, he was already there, but something was different. Instead of his usual calculus books, he had a single envelope on the table in front of him. Olivia, he started to stand, but I held up a hand. Before you say anything, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to know something. Did you really need help with calculus? He flinched. Actually flinched, I can explain. That's not an answer. No, he admitted after a long pause. I didn't need help with calculus. But it's not what you think. What I think. I laughed, but it came out hollow. What I think is that you somehow knew your dad was taking over at Anderson and Miller. What I think is that you found out the new VPS assistant had a daughter who was good at math and volunteered at the library. What I think is that this whole thing, every question, every smile, every almost moment, was just part of some elaborate plan. Olivia, please. The thing is, I continued, my voice cracking slightly, I'm actually pretty good at solving problems. Give me an equation, and I can break it down into its component parts. Show me a pattern, and I can predict what comes next. But this, I gestured between us. I can't solve this because I don't even know what variables I'm working with. He stood up then, and something in his eyes made my heart stutter despite everything. You're right about some of it, he said quietly. I did know who you were before I came to the library. And yes, I knew about my dad's new position. But you're wrong about why. He pushed the envelope across the table. Inside was a single piece of paper. A calculus test from 3 months ago, marked with a perfect score. His perfect score. I never needed help with calculus, he said. I needed an excuse to talk to the girl who'd been leaving post-it note suggestions in the margins of the library's classic literature collection. The girl who organized a quiet study zone during finals week last year because she noticed some students couldn't focus in the cafeteria. The girl who stayed late helping freshmen with their math homework even though she didn't have to. I stared at him, memories flooding back. The little notes I'd left in books asterisk if you like this. Try reading ... double quotes closing parenthesis. The study zone signs I'd made. The impromptu tutoring sessions I'd almost forgotten about. My dad's promotion was convenient timing. He continued, running his hands through his hair in that way that usually made my heart flip. Now it just made my chest ache. But I'd been trying to figure out how to talk to you since junior year. I just ... I am not great at first moves. Numbers make sense too. Me. People are harder. So you pretended to be bad at the one thing you knew I could help with. When you say it like that, it sounds kind of crazy. It is crazy, but I was smiling now, despite myself. You could have just asked me out, like I tried to do before my dad interrupted. He took a step closer. For what it's worth, I really am sorry about not being honest from the start. I just ... once I started pretending, I couldn't figure out how to stop without ruining everything. And then my dad actually took the job at your mum's company. And everything got so complicated ... double quotes. Speaking of complications, I said, remembering something. How did your dad know who I was that day in the library? A shadow crossed Ethan's face. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you today. There's something you should know about the company restructuring. And just like that, the moment shattered. Because sometimes the most dangerous equations are the ones where personal and professional variables intersect. And I had a feeling we were about to discover just how complicated that intersection could be. Mrs. Chen's voice drifted over from somewhere among the stacks. The library will be closing in 15 minutes. 15 minutes to hear whatever Ethan had to say. 15 minutes that might change everything. Again. I sat down across from him, my heart racing with equal parts hope and dread, and listening. The library had never felt so quiet as it did in that moment, waiting for Ethan to speak. Even the usual ambient sounds. The hum of fluorescent lights, the distant whir of the ancient heating system, the soft shuffling of Mrs. Chen reshelving books, seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The company restructuring, Ethan began, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not just about new management. They're planning to digitize everything. Move away from traditional publishing entirely. My stomach dropped. Mum had been in traditional publishing for 15 years. It was her life. Most of the current staff ... he continued. And stopped, clearly struggling with the words. They're going to let them go. I finished for him. The equation was solving itself in my head, each variable falling into place with terrible clarity. That's why they brought your dad in. He has experience with digital transitions. Ethan nodded miserably. I found out by accident. Dad was on the phone in his study last week, talking about streamlining operations and necessary workforce adjustments. Corporate speak for mass layoffs. The room felt like it was spinning when 3 months. Right after the fiscal year ends, he reached across the table, his hand hovering over mine. Not quite touching. Olivia, I wanted to tell you sooner, but Dad made me promise not to say anything. Said it could affect stock prices if word got out early. But I couldn't. I couldn't keep watching you worrying about your mom's late nights at the office, knowing what was coming. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. So this is why you really started talking to me? To ease your conscience? No. His response was immediate and fierce. Everything I said before was true. I've been trying to work up the courage to talk to you since I first found your notes in The Great Gatsby last year. This whole mess with our parents' company. It just made everything more complicated. More complicated, I repeated flatly. That's one way to put it. Here's another way. While my mom's been working overtime trying to impress her new bosses, they've already decided to fire her. And you've known for a week. I'm telling you now, he said softly, breaking about a dozen confidentiality agreements in the process. By the way, why tell me at all? He ran both hands through his hair, making it stand up in frustrated spikes. Because I care about you. Because every time you mentioned your mom's dedication to the company, it felt like someone was twisting a knife in my gut. Because I've spent the last week trying to figure out how to be both a good son and a good whatever I am to you. And what exactly are you to me, Ethan? I asked, suddenly tired. The boy who pretended to need tutoring, the son of the man about to destroy my mother's career. The whistleblower who waited until the last possible moment to blow his whistle. How about the guy who's been falling for you since junior year and just keeps finding new ways to mess it up? His voice cracked slightly. The guy who thought he could handle having a crush on the smartest girl in school until he actually got to know her and realized a crush doesn't even begin to cover it. Before I could respond, my phone burst, then his. Then both again in rapid succession. A mass text from the school. Asterisk due to unexpected severe weather conditions. All after-school activities are cancelled. Students still on campus should proceed to the main gymnasium immediately. Asterisk. Through the library windows, I could see what the administration was worried about. The sunny afternoon had transformed into an ominous twilight. Dark clouds rolling in with unnatural speed. A few snowflakes were already starting to fall. Mrs. Chen appeared beside our table like a sensible cardigan-wearing ghost. You need to head to the gym now. They're saying it's going to be the worst storm of the season. But we're not done. Ethan started to protest. The universe, Mrs. Chen said wisely, often has its own timing for these things. Now go. Both of you. We hurried to pack up our things. The conversation hanging unfinished between us like a suspended equation. As we reached the library doors, the lights flickered ominously. Olivia. Ethan caught my arm gently. What are you going to do? About everything. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the boy who'd orchestrated an elaborate ruse just to talk to me. Who'd broken his father's confidence to warn my family. Who looked at me now like I was both the question and the answer to some impossible mathematical proof. I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that in about 30 seconds, we're going to be stuck in the gym with half the school, probably overnight. If this storm is as bad as they say. And I think we're going to have plenty of time to figure it out. The lights flickered again, and outside, the snow was falling faster. We had a long night ahead of us. One that would force us to confront everything we'd left unsaid, every variable we'd left undefined, every equation we'd left unsolved. But for now, we just ran through the rapidly emptying halls, our footsteps echoing in sync, racing against a storm that seemed determined to trap us together until we got our story straight. Behind us, in the darkening library, Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly as she prepared to weather the storm with her books to company. After all, she'd seen enough stories play out among her shelves to know that sometimes the best plots take an unexpected turn just before the final chapter. There's something surreal about being trapped in your high school gymnasium with 200 other students during a snowstorm. The basketball hoops had become makeshift clotheslines for wet coats. The bleachers were transformed into sectioned-off territories, claimed by different social groups, and the usually echoing space was filled with a low hum of conversations, punctuated by occasional bursts of nervous laughter. Ethan and I had claimed a corner near the emergency exit, sitting on gym mats that smelled faintly of decades of teenage athletics. Neither of us had spoken since we'd arrived, both watching the snow pile up against the high windows. My phone buzzed, Mum. Stuck at the office because of the storm. Are you safe? At school in the gym I texted back. Don't worrying about me Don't worrying about me. Don't worrying about the job you're going to lose. Don't worrying about the fact that the man keeping you at the office right now is the same one who's planning to end your career. I can hear you thinking from here, Ethan said softly. Good. Saves me the trouble of saying it out loud. He shifted closer, his shoulder brushing mine. We need to talk about what happens next. What happens next is I tell my mum everything, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't that simple. And then what? His voice was gentle but insistent. Best case scenario, she starts looking for a new job early. Worst case, they figure out where the leak came from. My dad gets fired instead, and the company brings in someone else to do exactly the same thing. Only now our families are both unemployed. He had a point, and I hated it. So what's your solution? Remember that startup your mum mentioned, the one specializing in educational publishing? I turned to look at him properly for the first time since we'd entered the gym. Brightline Media. What about them? They're looking to expand. Dad's been reviewing potential acquisition targets for A&N's digital transition. Brightline is at the top of his list. But they're playing hard to get. They want to stay independent. Okay. I said slowly, not sure where he was going with this. Your mum knows educational publishing better than anyone at A&M. She has connections with half the school districts in the state. If she approached Brightline before the acquisition talks go public. The pieces started falling into place. They might hire her. Maybe even bring some of her team with her. Exactly. His eyes were bright with excitement. The digital transition is coming whether we like it or not. But that doesn't mean everyone has to lose. And your dad gets what he wants. A smoother transition when A&M eventually acquires Brightline, because they'll have experienced staff already in place. He smiled slightly. I may have inherited his head for business strategy, along with his talent for calculus. I couldn't help but tease. His laugh was shocked and genuine. You're never going to let me live that down, are you? Let's see. You pretended to be bad at math to get my attention, accidentally got caught up in corporate espionage, and then helped me devise a plan to save my mum's career. Pretty sure I get to hold this over you forever. The word forever hung between us, heavy with possibility. About that, he said, suddenly serious again. I know I messed up. Started this whole thing with a lie. Even if the feelings behind it were real. So if you want nothing to do with me after all this. I cut him off by reaching over and taking his hand. The thing about mathematics, I said, is that sometimes you can get the right answer even if you use the wrong method. His fingers intertwined with mine, warm despite the chill in the gym. Is that your way of saying you forgive me? It's my way of saying I understand why you did what you did. And that maybe, just maybe, some equations are worth solving even if they start with faulty assumptions. Outside, the storm raged on. But in our corner of the gym, something warm and hopeful was building. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom about staying safe and not worrying tomorrow. I'd have to figure out how to tell her about Brightline without revealing where the information came from tomorrow. Ethan would have to navigate his father's questions about his sudden interest in corporate strategy. Tomorrow would bring its own set of complications and calculations. But tonight. Tonight we had this. The sound of the wind outside, the distant chatter of our classmates, and the feeling that maybe we'd found the solution to an equation neither of us had known we were trying to solve. Hey, Ethan said after a while. You never did let me take you for that coffee. I laughed. We're trapped in a gym during a snowstorm. Good thing the cafeteria's emergency vending machine has those canned lattes you like. He paused. The ones you always drink during your Thursday afternoon shifts at the library. You noticed that. I noticed everything about you. Olivia Bennett. That's kind of how we ended up here. As he stood up to brave the vending machine line, I pulled out my phone one last time, not to text Mom, but to send a quick message to Mrs. Chen, who I knew would be worried about her favorite library assistant. Asterisk everything's fine. Some equations just take longer to solve than others. Asterisk. Her response came almost immediately. Asterisk. And sometimes the most complex problems have the simplest solutions. Just add honesty and multiply by time. Asterisk. I looked across the gym at Ethan, who was now arguing with the vending machine as if he could convince it to work through sheer force of will. He caught my eye and grinned sheepishly, and my heart did that familiar flip that no amount of mathematical precision could ever quantify. Some people might say we solved our problems despite the complications, but I prefer to think we solved them because of them. After all, the best stories, like the most elegant mathematical proofs, are the ones that take unexpected paths to reach their conclusion. And our story, well, it was just beginning its next chapter.